Lead balloons.
It's the alchemy of
Unpopular opinions. So,
whoops, I have somewhere to be. There's actually bourbon in this, so everyone knows.
those things are very complicated and
I don't know that I actually believe what I'm about to say.
spreading lies.
This critical culture that we live in.
Just to try to be an asshole.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. My name is Joel, and I'm talking to my leather-hatted friend, Trent. How you doing, friend?
Doing good, man. Just living the dream here in Denver, and getting her done. Really, I mean, nothing major, but basically getting her done.
Yeah, you look like you're getting done. Like,
yeah.
Driving the doggies around and wearing chaps.
This is what I put on before I get in my Dodge Ram, my black shiny Dodge Ram, and drive off to my IT job.
Where the bed is just like pristine, like nothing ever.
No, I wouldn't use the bed. No, I don't. I wouldn't use the bed. I wouldn't dream of doing that. I got it. Just for show.
Yep. Well, friends, we have a little bit of a different episode for you. We're going to do basically off the cuff. We're going to call this Unscripted. And Trent and I just want to experiment with this. Typically, our process is we do a little talk beforehand. We kind of work out where we're going with a conversation. But I think this one, we just want to give you a bit of a picture of what it looks like when Trent and I would just shoot the shit on the phone. Sometimes we would call each other before we did a podcast, and our conversations were just so rich and interesting. So, Trent, what do you think? You want to do a little rewind back to those days and just have an unscripted, off-the-cuff conversation?
Well, yeah, because that's kind of what got us moving in the direction of doing the podcast. Is we were talking more frequently, and I mean, we kept in touch pretty, reasonably regularly through the years, but we started talking more frequently, and we just found that we were having really, really interesting conversations. They were kind of far-ranging and fun and funny and these kinds of things. So it kind of moved us in the direction of the podcast. So yeah, we're gonna try this out.
Okay. So here's the topic. Here's the theme: prayer. We're gonna talk about prayer. Okay. So to start us off, Trent, give us a memory of what defined prayer for you growing up.
Man, I think, I think first of all, the obvious times that you pray around the dinner table. Basically, anytime you eat, you pray. In church, you pray. Maybe if you're leaving on a vacation or going to see relatives as they send you off, they would say a prayer, these kinds of things. So I remember those, but I think one of my fondest / maybe more painful memories of prayer was when I was in high school. I think it was my junior year. I got really involved with my church's youth group, and they had a discipleship program called Fire Institute. Foundation, inspiration, responsibility, and evangelism. And it was pretty intense, man. We read kind of spiritual classic or two. We memorized, I think, Romans chapter 6. We had to be at church a certain number of times. We had to, avoid going to the movie theater, whatever it was. And we
don't listen to secular music.
No, I mean, it's that kind of thing. And then the Fire Institute part 1, part 2 is even more intense. But in part 1, you were supposed to pray for 30 minutes a day. Now, when I was back in the day, when I was pretty faithful about praying most every day, I would probably average a good 5 minutes, maybe 10 if I was really getting after it. But man, 30 minutes was tough, dude. You're looking at the clock a little bit. You're like, I got to do that. I said 30 minutes, but you're just like, how many people can I pray for? How many ways can I say it? And I was just wondering who out there is praying so much.
My goodness. Yeah.
What about you, man?
You brought back a memory. You called it Fire. My youth group had a little workbook that we went through, and it was called Hell Fighters. We were hell fighters. Yep.
Oh my God.
We
All
fought
right.
hell.
We fought hell.
But when I think of prayer, I didn't realize until obviously later when I got older that there was such a unique experience of prayer in a Pentecostal setting.
Mm.
You had a lot of emotion. People come down to the altar on Sunday nights and just pray and what they call tarry for the Lord. And there would just
Yep.
be like, just loud sounds and groaning. Sometimes that was just very normal.
Mm.
There would be messages in tongues. There would be interpretations of tongues.
Mm.
There would be just a lot of like talking, very loud. When it's time to pray, you would just kind of hear this like out loud kind of experience, which is very different. I know other people have experiences of absolute quiet when everyone's
Mm-hmm.
praying. And, I was taught to see that as less spiritual, right?
Mm.
You get closer to God when you up the volume level. It's like, this is Spinal Tap. We as Pentecostals, we go to 11. And so
yeah.
I remember that. And in seventh grade, coming down to an altar call to get baptized with the Holy Spirit. And the expectation was begin to pray in tongues, which I understood to be like an angelic kind of language, where the Bible would talk about like there's the Holy Spirit would speak through you and word in groans and utterances that you can't even put into words. And that happened for me. That's something I partook in for a while. Did you have experiences like that with the tongues thing in the Pentecostal settings?
Yeah, I mean, you're describing almost verbatim the kinds of things that I experienced too. I think it was one of the nights, maybe it was Wednesday before the service or Sunday night or something. Our youth group would do a prayer time. I think it was called hop time, hour of prayer, and you'd be in this room, and it was easier for me to pray then because they would have people come up and pray. And then there was other times when some people would be sitting down. I usually walked around, but you could walk around and just kind of pray quietly and this kind of thing. Yeah, definitely. People speaking in tongues and interpreting and these kinds of things. So, yeah.
Did you speak in tongues?
I had that experience when I was a junior in high school. Yeah, I did have that experience. Yeah.
I do want to like circle back to that, and I think it'd be interesting for us where we're at now to kind of look back on what those experiences were and what was fruitful and what was fruity.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving forward a bit with prayer, what was an area that you would say, post, college and afterwards, where prayer shifted for you in some way and became a little bit different or new or more meaningful? Tell me about that.
I mean, I maintained a reasonably consistent prayer habit for pretty much all through my 20s. Usually I'd read the Bible and pray in the morning or in the evening or something like that. But
when you prayed, what did you do? Like, what did you pray about? Did you follow a formula?
I would usually pray for family members. I would pray for friends. I would pray for people that I or someone close to me was trying to reach with the gospel. That was pretty common. Pray for people, pray for, so-and-so to get saved and this kind of a thing. Pray for missionaries.
You prayed for lost people.
Lost people to get saved. Prayed for missionaries. And then current events and stuff like that. That was a lot of it. I'd say one of the iterations of my prayer life was when I was at ORU. And this really shaped me in a painful way when I was in college, because there were a lot of people who spoke pretty kind of casually about having experiences where God appeared to them or spoke to them or called them to something. And I so desperately wanted that experience because everyone was having it and because I genuinely wanted to know what God was calling me to do. And I would seek the Lord time after time after time, and I never really felt that I ever had anything like that experience. And so that was a frustration that kind of added on to a list of as I went along in life, a list of frustrations that I had with prayer and with God, where I thought, I'm asking you these things over and over and over and again, and we can go into this too. But then when I was in seminary in Kansas City, I was probably 25, 26, and we read a book called, I think it was called Providence in Prayer, and it was a theological study of all the different sort of views of providence, from sort of total like open theism, where God's completely influenceable, all the way to like the staunchest hyper Calvinist.
Yeah.
And so the question that book was asking very articulately was, how do these different views of God's providence impinge upon one's prayer life? It was a pretty thick book, but I felt like it was a very important book for me, especially at the time, to consider these things.
Yep.
Yeah. What about yourself? What were some of the growing experiences? How did you shift and evolve with prayer, heading into your 20s and 30s?
I mean, when I was in college, I had a pretty disciplined routine. So I remember if our classes started for whatever reason with the number 50 after they were 750s, 850s, 950s. So if I had an 850 class, I treated myself like I had a 750, and I would get up and I would go to the chapel, and it would be open and completely empty. It would be dark in the main,
the big chapel, Christ
the big
Chapel.
And I went to Christ Chapel every morning during the week, and I would get up and I'd walk and I'd snake through the aisles, because if I sat down, I'd fall asleep for sure. But I tried to I remember being inspired by Benjamin Franklin, who had like a virtue that he focused on every week or something like that. And I thought, well, I'll pick 5 virtues and focus on one every day. So on Mondays, I focused on, say, passion, or Tuesdays on purity, on Wednesdays on faith. And I would memorize a scripture verse for each day, and I'd try and recite that over and over again. And then I would just pray about that. And I went so far as I laminated this little card for all the different people I was praying for, my pastors, friends, lost friends, things like that. And, looking back, it's interesting you bring up that book, Providence and Prayer, because that's always been my big struggle with prayer is this doing anything? Does this do anything? And I remember there being a quote from Soren Kierkegaard, existentialist philosopher, who said, prayer doesn't change God, prayer changes me. And I heard that when I was in high school. And back then, I don't think I understood what it was really about. And then later on, as I grew, I began to see prayer more as like, oh, God is influenceable. Why, this is a stupid exercise if he isn't. What's the point of praying if this doesn't add to some sort of outcomes, shifting things? And for me, my journey has been to see the futility of some of these beliefs that I think I've known for a long time were a little silly. But I tend to, I think I swung towards, prayer, God can be influenced with prayer, more open theistic, or just the idea that somehow our faith changes outcomes. The problem with that belief, if you remember, there's a comedian named Tim Minchin. I think he's Australian. And he would write these, he's an atheist, and he writes these very sarcastic songs. And he has I heard him, like, one of his concerts, he dresses up in all this craziness and tells a story about he ran into a guy named Sam, who was trying to have a spiritual conversation with him, and saying, Sam, he's like, how do you know God doesn't exist? And to mention, have the conversation with him, it's like, how do you know, Sam? He's like, well, he tells a story about his, someone, a friend of his mom being sick, and everyone prayed for her and she got better. And so she knows that God is real. And he wrote an entire song about it, just saying, Sam's right, Sam's right. And while Sam is right, God is a cunt. Because he healed this woman, but lets all these other people die of diseases. Because these kids said the right prayers. I'm going to let all these people die of hunger. I'm going to let disease ravage entire populations. I'm going to let all these horrific things happen. And then when you're just listening to it and the logic of it, I'm just like, oh my God. Yeah, the shadow side of that, if we believe prayer works, we have to account for when it leads to very difficult outcomes. I remember I don't know if you remember this. There was a guy on my floor, my I think it was my sophomore or my junior year, and he actually he jumped up and grabbed a basketball rim, just kind of like jumping up, grabbed it, and then like flipped him. He laid on the back of his head.
Yeah.
He went to the hospital, and his mom came into town from like Montana. She flew in. This is like near Thanksgiving break, and she flew down, and it was a flurry of faith and prayer, like so much prayer about him getting healed, and he ended up dying.
Yeah.
I was in the hospital room with a bunch of family that I had just met, and when they took him off the respirator, and we watched the heartbeat go flatline, and I remember being out in the hallway afterwards and not feeling like I belonged there, because it was just like there was so much grief and seriousness, and I'm just this guy that they met who happened to be the chaplain for their son, nephew / whatever. And his mom came over to me and she said something so powerful, and just grief etched on her face. And she said, "Joel, we prayed that God would heal Joshua, and God said no." And she said it was just like acceptance, like I don't understand. I'm still very sad, but I accept that was the answer. And to me, that kind of experience was so powerful to me, because that to me was someone who is in alignment with reality. Whatever stories people make up about it, she was not resisting reality. And so moving forward, I think my views on prayer dramatically shifted to less about trying to control outcomes and more about becoming the kind of person who trusts life to unfold as it's going to unfold anyways. Do you have any like instances that you can think of where there was something very like jarring that happened and prayer was a part of it?
Man, I don't know. I'm trying to think of anything that really, really sticks out. I mean,
Surely
I think
you were part of like experience where there was someone who was sick that everyone's praying for, or someone. I mean, that's a major tenet of the tradition grew up on, was divine healing. What was your encounters with some of that?
Man, I never really had any of those experiences.
Really?
Big ones. No. I'm trying to think of if we were prayed for someone and they became a Christian. I mean, that's a thing, is just a lot of unanswered prayers. And I think that was the big thing. People have asked, we've had conversations about whence my atheism. And I would be the first to tell anybody that that my experiences sort of lay the groundwork for me to begin sort of this intellectual pursuit. But had I had different experiences, I may still have been a Christian. Yeah. But I think one of the ones that I had was just probably in my early 30s, where I was just praying over and over again for certain situations, in not in a self-aggrandizing way, but praying for situations where, like, yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that God would want. Not like, that I would get a, $10,000 or get a job promotion, but like something that's would honor God for it. It would be amazing. And it didn't happen. I just remember thinking, like, what gives, man? Yeah. Like, if I call you up and I say, Joel, can you do something for me? I'll probably get a yes or a no, or a maybe I'll think about it. But it doesn't work that way. At least in my experience with God, it was, we don't know. We don't have an answer. So it's such a weird practice, isn't it? Like, you can read the Bible, and to the extent that you believe it's inspired or infallible or whatever authority ascribed to it, that you're sort of doing business in a certain way with God. I mean, it's there on the page, right? but in prayer, you're transacting with the divine in such an amorphous, unknown, unidirectional way. And there were times when it felt rich. I mean, I will say there were a lot of times when, I mean, you speak about, I don't know about massive answer prayers or shocking moments, but I remember having some wonderfully rich times in which I felt like I was communing with God, and I was with him, and we were transacting, and we were, I was learning things, and maybe he was speaking to me in terms of nudging me according to things that other people had said or I had read in the Bible or whatever it was. So I did have some very, very powerful times in prayer. And I wouldn't say, I mean, we can maybe spin it towards the direction of sort of like how it overlaps with like meditation and so forth. But prayer, probably it would be, I mean, I wonder if it could be measured what kind of impact it had on my life. But there was the discipline factor was good. The thinking outwardly about, I mean, it put other people on my mind regularly, is I'm thinking about this person. And to the extent that I was praying for their well-being, it probably gave me more compassion for them. So there were those aspects that I don't know can be duplicated outside of prayer or some kind of intentional meditative practice. So there is probably some loss there, but I do feel some gain there as well, given that I don't deal really with disappointment about unanswered prayers anymore.
We're trying to bang your head against the wall and control circumstances through this.
Yes.
Like, that's one thing. When I studied abroad in the Philippines, I took a class called Pentecostalism and Animism, which studied some of the overlap for animistic religions and how Pentecostalism, and there is quite a bit of overlap, because one of the things is, especially a tenet of animism, is that the gods or the spirits or whatever the culture calls the higher powers are basically human-esque, and you can manipulate them, whether that's through rituals, amulets, rain dances, certain prayers or mantras, that these are all things that we can do. I get the crystal and I hold it, and then these things happen in the physical world because of these incantations. And I began to really see clearly studying those. I think the professor was trying to get us to think about how Pentecostals can help evangelize people because we speak similar languages. But ultimately, I began rejecting both of them because I saw both putting themselves at the center of the universe, as if I'm the center and everything else is ancillary sort of side piece to my agendas. And how can I manipulate them? How can I get this God to do this for me and this God to do that for me? In the Philippines, they talked about how someone would go to their witch doctor in their tribe and get an amulet that might, protect them from disease or help their fertility. And then they'd go down the other street to the church and have the Catholic priest bless it. Just kind of covering all their bases.
I know. That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
I think deep down, what, especially in charismatic circles, prayer is a story that people tell themselves as an opportunity to leverage reality in their favor. How can I make things happen my way? Whether it's my sports team gets to win or my kid gets home safe. It's like almost these like this delusional practice that people embark in that helps them. It's like we give ourselves placebos to create this sense of faith and trust that we don't know how to have by itself.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think about kind of contrasting approaches to prayer. One is like as you've described, where God is the divine Coke machine. You put in your money, which is your prayer, and then you sort of punch in which product you want, and then it comes out for you. That's how people view it. But like, instead of that, this would be maybe one of the strengths, not that it was exclusive to this mode of prayer, but one of the strengths of maybe a more Calvinistic view of prayer was, I'm here to be part of what God is doing. I don't know how it's happening. I don't know why it's happening, but I'm here to play my part in it, to present to God to my petitions, and he does with it what he will. I mean, you could also do that from a free will perspective, but there was a healthy dose probably of humility,
Yeah.
but you see some people praying. It's like, oh, pray for me to get this job. I'm really hoping, or my team to win, or this kind of thing. It's just like, what do you're going to talk to God about that stuff? What are you doing? I mean,
Yeah, I absolutely feel that way too. Yeah.
What is your current understanding of prayer? Do you have anything like a prayer practice now? How has that evolved in the past 5 years for you?
I have slowly been leaning more towards the mystical and the meditative, or what Christian tradition would call contemplative prayer. Thinking of practices like Lectio Divina, which is using a portion of scripture and not reading it in terms of the way that you and I were trained in seminary to read it, but more or less reading it like just a random poem and allowing it to wash over us, and to just kind of reflect on it, and then almost to disengage from our cognitive faculties and try and like just almost just feel it. I don't know. That's kind of a way to say it. I also lean towards some just breathing exercises that work completely. I did a lot of mindfulness meditation. Started practicing practices that I learned from more Buddhist traditions. There was this one that I had a friend tell me about where I lay down. I've only done this twice, and both time it was so powerful. Where I put on headphones and I listened to like some very rhythmic drumming and like shamanistic drumming. Is basically to get you into a meditative trance. And you lay on the ground, you put that on there, and you do this for 45 minutes. And you breathe very strictly, like deep inhale, deep exhale. You're like, and you do that for 45 minutes. And I have to cover myself with a blanket because I start getting cold just laying there on the ground. And I did that for 45 minutes twice. And both times I had just because basically your brain's coming up with stuff all the time. You learn about this in meditation is how do I create some space between me and my thoughts? I am not my thoughts. How can I just let them go without attaching to them? And in both those exercises, I at some point would cry, start just weeping by the end of it. And it was usually some kind of catharsis. And I couldn't even put my finger on why it was happening all the time. It was,
interesting.
During those days, I was going through a divorce. So I'm sure a lot of that was some pent up shit inside of me. But I've learned through meditation I still do it occasionally. I don't do it as much as I would like to these days. But I deeply trust in whatever prayer is, that there's something mystical happening. I think it's more baked into our ability to detach our egos. It's more in this world of how do I deal with some of the issues in my tissues. The body keeps the score, trauma, all that kind of stuff. That's where I kind of overlap a lot of these meditative practices, or just contemplation, just contemplating, trying to really align myself with the reality and go like, I live in a world. Like I watched a documentary the other day. I didn't get through the whole thing, but it was about North Korea. It was something utopia. I forget. It was so powerful and so disturbing for me to realize, oh, this is still happening. This kind of atrocities are still happening just on the other side of the planet. And we're all just letting it happen because we can't figure out a way to stop it. And all these people being murdered, being tortured. And and contemplation is to sit down and go like, here I am in my home. I have all the freedoms I could possibly imagine or need. And that's also happening on the other side of the planet of people who just happen to be born in a different place. So what contemplation does is like, can I create space in me for both of those to exist? And those are kind of what I think about in terms of the power of prayer.
That's kind of a negative meditation, that where you take yourself to maybe a dark place.
Yeah.
But that's good. I mean, I don't like the notion of like meditation is how can I remind myself of how fucking amazing I am, like that. I don't know that's if that's the only thing that I want to do. I mean, I am, that amazing, but I
You
don't
are.
necessarily think it's healthy to think about it. But no, yeah, that's interesting. I was watching. Have we mentioned Wim Hof before? Do you
Yeah.
know about that
Oh,
character? So
I do know him, but I don't know if we've talked about him.
the Iceman, you
Oh
know.
yeah, I've done some of
So
that too. Yeah.
I mean, I've never done like a true cold plunge in the way that he does it, but cold showers and stuff I've experimented with. But and I've gotten in cold water, you know, at the lake. I've done cold swims for sure. But I remember there was a documentary that was made maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and this group of young people, they went and they, you know, they would go hiking in the snow, and then they would do cold plunges. But he had a thing, I think it was right at the beginning of this seminar weekend conference. He had everybody come into this room about the size of a large bedroom, and there were probably 7 or 8 people there, and they just got on the floor, and then he kind of led them into deep breathing
Yep.
exercises, because he's known for like breathing and cold plunge and
Yep.
manipulation of your body's
To make your body alkaline.
he's a nut. He's a
He
nut,
talks so
man.
aggressively.
He's so yeah. He does. He's like yeah. Are you healthy? Are you strong? Are you powerful? But
Yeah.
he. So when people were doing these breathing, there were a couple people that I remember from this documentary who started like shaking and weeping and stuff. And I don't know all the mechanisms, but I would imagine when you're not breathing deeply like that, you're holding on to a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to relax into your body, because one of the things that Wim says, which is fairly common sense, but it's good hearing him say it. He says that if you experience trauma and you don't process the trauma, it gets stored in your body as chemistry. Yep. It translates into chemistry. I think that's totally true. And if you don't work it out somehow, it doesn't just go away, I don't think.
It manifests differently and often as cancerous cells.
That's right. Yep. Gabor Mate. I mean, it's crazy. The mind-body connection is absolutely insane. And it's powerful stuff that he does.
Yeah, I love Wim Hof, and I love all of that kind of that world. I've told you that I've done ayahuasca before, which is laying, and you lay on your mat and you take the medicine, which is hallucinogenic in nature, but you're basically you're ultimately trying to do is process old stuff. Mm-hmm. And you're just trusting the process, and you just kind of it kind of goes back to what I've heard some therapists say, what you resist persists.
Right.
And so learning to allow. But with that being said, I want to kind of circle back and close with this.
The sinner's prayer.
Yeah. Bow your head, close your eyes. No one looking around, please.
I see that hand.
I see that hand. Okay, so you had experiences with praying in tongues.
Mm.
How do you look back on that now? Do you see that positively, negatively? What role did it play? And how, if someone told you, asked you if, would you ever pray in tongues again? What would your response be?
I'm not sure if I would say that I see it either negatively or positively, although maybe slightly positively, because at the very minimum, what was happening with me at that time in my life was, well, many things. When I was I think I was probably 16 or 17 when I had this experience. It was in one of the main services, like a Sunday night service at church. And I remember the pastor asking if you wanted to be filled with the Spirit, like come down, and people prayed for me. And then I just sort of cut loose and blah, 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 did the whole thing.
Should have bought a Hyundai.
Well, but I bought a Mitsubishi, and so it ended up working out okay. But for me, it was Cora Boshando, Rita Bosica. I think that it was one of those moments in my life. You've had these moments, I'm sure, where you felt like you needed to challenge yourself to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And to embarrass yourself. It was embarrassing to do that in front of other people, but it was a good step for me to say, not going to care in this moment about what people think. I think this is important. At the time, I thought it was true. And so I did it. So I think it built character in that way. And then later on down the line, I was able to look back on it and reflect on it. I don't know what to make of that experience. I mean, I'd heard people speaking in tongues, and I'm good at mimicry, so that it's not that difficult to figure out how I could do it. But there was something inexplicable to it, and I'll happily just sit with that. But I'm glad that I had that experience. It was interesting, and again, it was fun to kind of, or it was a good growth moment for me to have. So, again, this is like a lot of my experiences in the church, good and bad. A lot of things I grew from, and I take with me this day that I'm so thankful for, and other things that I wish I could have left behind, wish I wouldn't have done, or wish that I just wouldn't have, been sympathetic to, and would have parted ways with, and instead of believed and gone in that direction. But that was interesting. I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. And for me, it's similar. I look back and I see it positively, honestly, even though I don't believe any of the teachings I was told what was happening. But looking back, what I think was happening was early young Joel's version of contemplation.
Yeah.
And because even when I used to teach theology at Pentecostal colleges, and we talk about baptism of the Holy Spirit as a primary distinctive doctrine for the Assemblies of God, I would talk about just how I didn't really agree with some of those doctrines. I think they're more polemical and political than they are anything else. They're about trying to, a doctrine or a denomination trying to be distinctive from other denominations. That's really what's happening. And I would look at those experiences and go like, that's where I'm very analytical. I can be very judgmental and in the way that I think about things, and just trying to like getting in my head and trying to control via mental gymnastics. And speaking in tongues was an opportunity for me just to go, forget all that. I'm just going to go pure mystic here. And now I'm able to engage in that mysticism without the fanfare, so to speak. But I will admit that when I'm in deep despair, or if I have like very highly emotional states of being, which when I went through my divorce, I would be just driving around on the highway by myself, just out of nowhere, would just start weeping in the car because I just had so much like resistance in me, but a lot of things that I was genuinely grieving. And I would occasionally just go back to, and it's almost in a sense like going back to an adolescent self, and I would just start speaking in tongues, and it felt so comforting to me to do that, even though I didn't believe I was saying anything meaningful. I didn't think I was somehow closer to God. A lot of Pentecostal churches will treat people who speak in tongues with black belts, and everyone else is brown belts or below. I didn't believe it made me superior in any way, but I do think it was a practice that like my body appreciated. And so that's kind of how I view prayer these days. I don't need to be able to explain it. In fact, explaining it is super boring to me. It's doing this, it's doing that, this is what's happening. I'm like going, dude, you don't fucking know that. You don't know any of that. And so I don't know. What are your thoughts today about prayer?
Well, I guess the question I would leave with myself and with you and anybody who's listening or watching is sort of what are the sort of ongoing or proxy or substitutionary liturgies of life that maybe we can come up with, like what replaces prayer? If prayer has some sort of psychological benefit to it, if you're not Christian anymore, of no faith or of a different faith, what replaces prayer? And that's part of the cultural project. I think if people who are leaving the church are not identifying with the church, what are some of the liturgies there that were in some ways life-giving that can be, reimagined? For me, like, I don't pray anymore. Never really even tempted to pray. But however, each morning I still wake up, cup of coffee. I might read something. I might journal. That comes in phases, but I'll look at my calendar, and a lot of times I'll just sit and look out the window. Sometimes sit outside, and that's maybe the replacement for prayer. Is just that morning ritual of this is how I start my day. I kind of think about what I want to do, who I want to be, and think about other people, and that kind of is a substitute for prayer.
Yeah.
But I think these are good, Joel. I think these are really interesting conversations. Is what do we do? Should we completely abandon all Christian practices? Should we modify them, reimagine them? Should we just preserve certain ones? Would it still be good to say the Apostles' Creed? I mean, these are open questions I don't have the answer to, because I do think there's some life-giving aspects to these things, and they've served communities well for thousands or hundreds, hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's something there that's pretty powerful. And even though I just think I don't think you save Christianity for the sake of, it's been around for a long time. But when something has been around, you do ask the question of what about this has been so enduring? What would we be remiss to abandon?
Yeah. I love that perspective, and I agree. And there's so many different ways that people have prayed throughout the centuries just within Christianity. There's not.
Yeah.
This is one thing when I watched the Olympics and the people just reacting to the Olympics opening and all the sense that all these evangelicals in America were up in arms because they thought it was mocking the Last Supper, and sometimes you'd hear some of the reactions like, "Oh, you Christians," and I'm like, "There's actually not Christianity. There are Christianities."
Absolutely.
There's so many different kinds of Christians out there who believe so many different things, and they engage prayer in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And so the interesting question to me is which ones are helpful and which ones are not. And so that's what I would leave people with.
Always, ever the pastor's heart, Joel Triska.
Well, we want to kind of make this one a shorter one, an unscripted, off the cuff episode on topic of prayer. Trent, do you have any final words or quotes that you would leave with people in your cowboy hat?
I would just simply say, give us this day our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
The evil one or evil?
Well, it's a translation issue.
It is. It is. I'm being brought back to some of my Greek classes right now as you're saying that. All right. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for this episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Trent and I, here we are, unscripted, off the cuff. Hope you enjoyed it. Please give us a like, a subscribe on YouTube, or go check us out on any of the podcast platforms. You can go to our website, leadballoonspod.com, or you can email us at leadballoonspodcast@gmail.com. And let us know about something else you'd love for us to just riff off of. Give us a word or two and say, talk about this. We would think that's the best.